Okay, now for this part of the build, we're moving into the frame now. I'm going to deviate from the manual quite a bit. If we do it this way, it's easier to get the engine in at the end, easier to work with the engine and stuff like that. So you're still going to need your manual to reference to get the parts that you need, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to assemble. We're going to do it in like 2 or 3 steps here. And the first step we're going to do is we're going to assemble one whole side of the frame. Get all the radio trays, all the cross members, supports, and everything like that in there. So I'm going to go ahead and gather up those parts, and we'll come back and I'll show you what we're going to start doing. Alright, before we start putting the frame together, there's a couple things I want to mention here first. Now would be a good time to put the servo mounting tabs in. It's easier to get to the screws and hold everything, so it might be a good idea to do that. Just take a look at your manual. You can find in there where they're supposed to go. Most of them mount on the inside. The only one that mounts on the outside is the tail servo. And the way to tell the left side from the right side on the rear, the easiest way is just to put them together like this and look at the servo holes on the rear, and the one that's lowest, that's your tail servo. That's the side for the tail servo, and that's going to be your left hand side. So I'm going to assemble the left hand side of the frame. So I'm going to go ahead and get the servo tabs mounted in here and get everything ready to go. And then we'll come back and I'll show you what other parts we're going to use. Okay, like I said, we're going to deviate from the manual quite a bit here. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to build half of the frame now. So you're going to need to get pretty much go through the different sections of building the frame and pull out the parts you need to put half of this together. You're going to need the bottom frame piece, both of the radio trays, the left sides of the frame. Make sure you pay attention. You get the left side, that's the one with the lower servo hole. Now one of the frame stiffeners, one of the vertical supports. You'll need 2 of the cross supports, the elevator crank. You're going to need your fuel tank and the dampening material for the fuel tank as well. When you install that, make sure you pay attention. One side sticks out further than the other when you stick it in. You want the flatter side to be towards the inside so it doesn't cause any issues when you're putting the fuel tank together and squeezing everything together, and it doesn't make the frame wider than it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and and then don't forget your associated screws. So I'm going to go ahead and get this half of the frame built up, and we'll come back and take a look at it. Alright, so now I've got half of this frame assembled. As you can see, I've got the 2 radio trays on here. I've got the upper and lower bearing blocks. One set of the, or 2 of the cross braces that go across the cross frame supports. The ones that are right in front and behind of the main shaft. We got the fuel tank sitting in there. You could probably hold off on putting that in. You might want to go ahead and put one of the canopy posts in now. Makes it a little easier to get it in there. One of the frame stiffeners, and we got all this attached to the bottom frame. So basically that's pretty much the left side of the frame that's now assembled. Don't forget when we go to put the other side of the frame on there, don't forget to put your elevator crank in there. So we don't want to forget that. So now what we're going to do is move on to putting the main gear, tail gear assembly, and the main shaft in. One of the unfortunate problems that came up here, or one of the unfortunate things that came up when they were trying to keep this frame so light and keep it stiff, they weren't able to cut out enough of this hole to get the main gear to slide in and out of the frame. It doesn't fit. So we have to do this as we're building, and that also means that if you have a crash where you do strip your main gear, you're gonna have to tear one side of the frame off to get into it. I've crashed this thing quite a few times already, so I haven't stripped one yet, knock on wood. I think you'd really have to put one in pretty hard. This is a pretty beefy gear if you're pretty good on hitting your throttle hold and everything. So the tail hub, or the tail gear, comes assembled already, so you might want to check those bolts for Loctite. I went ahead and installed my hub. The short side comes in from the bottom. Then go ahead and screw it down, make sure you Loctite all those bolts. We're going to need that. We're going to need our main shaft, our locking collar, the brass washer that goes on the bottom there, the 2 grub screws, and then the holding pin that holds all this to the main shaft, or the driving pin, or whatever you want to call it there. So, and we're also going to need our sleeve. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this stuff put together. When you do this, when you put that sleeve in there, there's 2 Torringtons in there, so you don't want to force it too much. You just kind of want to get it started and start spinning it, and you're going to feel it catch twice. But you don't want to be jamming it through. Just twist it and it'll kind of follow through, and you'll feel it. It goes through pretty easily. Then we got our tail drive gear that we're going to put up there. So now the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take the main shaft. We're going to put it in. We're going to start the main shaft in. Make sure you get it the right way. The higher hole goes towards the bottom. So now we got that started in there. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to put our locking collar in. Now this locking collar, one side has a ridge on it that goes towards the bearing. So you want to make sure you get that in there towards the bearing and start sliding this in. You slide it down, just went a little too far there, but just get it down past the locking collar there. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to insert the hub gear assembly. We're going to slide that in there, and then we're going to start pushing the main shaft through that assembly. Now, one thing to keep in mind, you know, these things are not fully held in place yet, and it's a pretty tight tolerance with that main shaft and those bearings. So if this gets off kilter just a little bit, it's going to want to lock up. So don't keep forcing it through. Just kind of keep, you know, moving stuff around till it wants to move through freely, and it'll go in real nice and easy. Okay. And what you want to do is get enough of this main shaft in so that it's just barely sticking out the bottom of the assembly, and I went too far. Okay, there we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn it over here so we can put this brass washer in. I just find it's easier to do it this way. Get it upside down there, get that washer sitting up there, and then you can take one of your Allen drivers and get it to sit down over top of the main shaft. Once you do that, then you can finish in pushing the main shaft through, and there you go. Okay, so now we've got our main shaft installed. Now it should be pretty much close to being flush with the bottom, so don't drive too far. Now the next thing we need to do is get this cross pin in. What I typically do for that is I'll take my 2mm wrench and I'll start it in there and spin it around until I catch the sleeve, and then I'll spin the main shaft and try and find that little hole. Sometimes it's easier than it looks. There it is. Now I know I've got everything lined up. So I'll stand her back up here, and we're going to go ahead and put this cross pin in. Looks like I may have got it out of alignment again, so we'll take the driver in there and kind of wiggle it around, get it squared up. Just keep using that driver to move it around and try to get that pin in there. Sometimes it may take a little bit of love tapping to get it in there, so get a little pair of pliers here and there you go. Got her through there. Now you're going to want to get that seated in there just enough to get one of these grub screws started in the hub. You want it probably about a thread or two out, and come back to spin it around, get to the other side, push it back through, take the other grub screw and get it installed too. Get it tightened down. You want to try and make them even as much as possible. You're going to see I didn't put any Loctite on there, but make sure you do get some Loctite in there. And now we've got the main gear installed here on the inside the frame. We're not going to do anything with the locking collar yet. We'll wait until we get all this and the other side of the frame in, then we'll go ahead and get everything positioned right, and we'll lock down that locking collar. So our next step that we're going to be looking at doing is now assembling the second half of the frame, bringing the second half onto there, the right side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and take a look.